This is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. I'm Ryan Kroll, filling in for your usual host, Sarah Fensky, who will be back next episode. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by St. Louis Art Museum's Corporate Partner Program. There are no shortage of opinions about this city and its leadership, but few of them are as well-informed as Connor Kerrigan's. He's the author of Show Me Last Week on Substack, where he penned some of the smartest writing that can be found about this town. Kerrigan is such a savvy observer of City Hall, and more specifically, its Room 200, which is the heart of the mayoral administration, because for several years, he worked at the center of it all, running Mayor Tishaura Jones's communications operation and serving as her spokesman. He talks about what he says was the pure adrenaline of that job and what it was like when his boss lost re-election and he lost his job. A little bit later, we'll be speaking to St. Louis Magazine's business editor, Eric Schmid, about a proposed controversial data center development in St. Charles and the community pushback to it that Eric witnessed firsthand. But first, Connor Kerrigan, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want to start by asking you just a little bit about your old job back when you were Mayor Tishaura Jones's chief spokesperson, communications director. And it seems to me like that job entailed a deluge of daily phone calls from the media, who mostly were not calling to write about how amazing everything was.
No.
So the question is, why did you want that job?
Oh, man. I wanted that job for a couple of reasons. A, I thrive on adrenaline, and that job is pure adrenaline. You wake up in the morning and you check the news, and there's 3 articles about something horrible that happened that you're going to have to respond to, and then it's just pure adrenaline the rest of the day. I also really wanted the opportunity to serve the city in a way that aligned with my skill set and was also like very involved. It was very cool to be at the heart of everything and be so informed and know what was going on. And to be honest, I really wanted to work with Tishaura. I had met her when I was on a campaign in 2020 when she was the treasurer. And I thought she was so impressive. And then I really had appreciated her as a public servant for a long time. And so the opportunity to get to work for her was really, really cool.
Yeah. You talked about sort of running on adrenaline, and it seemed to me like so much of that job it's just inherently reactive. Like something's coming down, you got to prep for it. But the one thing I always admired about you as a comms guy was you were pretty good about, as much as you could, given the sort of inherent conditions of the job, trying to be a little bit proactive and try to sort of do some messaging that was just not responding to the latest fire.
Right.
Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. When I was first brought on board, Mayor Jones and Jared Boyd, her chief of staff, emphasized that being more proactive in their communications was what they were really looking for in their next comms director, someone who could generate good news rather than, as you said, just respond to the bad news. And so I started to treat the comm shop in Room 200 a bit like a newsroom, where I would work with the other public information officers in other departments in the city. I would work with my team internally in Room 200, and we would try to find the good news that was happening and push that out through our social media, through press releases, so that it wasn't just constantly bad news about the city of St. Louis. Because the amazing thing is there's so much good happening in this city. Like truly, there are so many incredible things happening that are moving this city in the right direction, but it's not sexy to report on this new infrastructure project. It's not sexy to report on these new trees that were planted. And so those things get undercovered while the, scandal in the building division, multiple week news cycle, the winter storm, which I'm sure we'll talk about, a multiple week news cycle. Whereas, I really saw it as my job too. Yep, we have to react to that stuff. We have to be responsive to the media. But at the same time, we need to make sure that in some capacity, people are aware of the good that is happening in this city and the ways that we are working to make things better.
Yeah. I was curious. I'm wondering, let's say it's Monday night, and you know that on Tuesday morning, like you've been getting inquiries from, I don't know, like someone from the Post or something like that. You know that something bad is going to drop Tuesday morning about the storm response or about the scandal in the building division, whatever it is. What's that night before the bad news tomorrow morning? What is that? What did that look like for you in that job?
Yeah, it was a lot of phone calls. Hey, heads up, this will come out tomorrow. Just so you know, whether it was someone who is involved in the story, someone who needed to know about it. Hey, heads up, this is about to happen. Certainly a call to the mayor. Hey, I got some bad news. This story is about to drop. A lot of that, and then a lot of drafting, a lot of writing, a lot of making sure that, because typically what would happen is someone from the Post would catch a story, they would publish it, and then the next day all the TV stations would cover it. That was kind of the rhythm of things.
Someone from the Post or St. Louis Magazine.
Or St. Louis Magazine, after you guys hopped on board and started the daily newsletter. And so being able to have 3 talking points about the issue, a statement from the mayor that was fully approved by everyone that needed to approve it. So the night before was phone calls and drafting, just a lot of writing to make sure that we were ready to be responsive to that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think this maybe didn't totally coincide with your tenure, but definitely while more or less while you were in the mayor's comm shop, a lot of those TV outlets moved from the city to the county. Fox 2 went to, I think they both basically went to Maryland Heights 2 and 4.
Yep.
Did you see any kind of change in the sort of tenor of coverage from some of the TV stuff after they moved out of the city?
I think, and I don't have access to Channel 4 or Channel 2's internal numbers, but I think what you would see is after they moved out to the county, their city viewership probably decreased and their county viewership increased. Those are 2 extremely different audiences that are looking for different perspectives on the city. A lot of city residents are looking for those positive stories because they live here and they want to know that good things are happening. A lot of county residents, and not all county residents, but a lot of county residents, they want to kind of reaffirm their biases about the city, that it's dangerous, that it's, that it's a problem, that, it's unsolvable and scary. And I think what happens is when you see your audience start to have that sentiment, you start to want to give them coverage that reaffirms those biases.
Yeah, you're sort of serving that specific audience. Yeah.
And that's not to say that because KSDK is still downtown, and that's not to say that KSDK was always, positive about the city. I certainly had a lot to answer for that station as well. But I do think that in the current media environment, and you can speak this probably better than I can, but I think in the current media environment, in the same way that I was being reactive, the media has to be reactive to their audience because the model and the profit incentives and everything has shifted so much in the last few years with the introduction of social media and digital marketing and all of this stuff. And so their incentives changed when their audience changed.
Yeah. A personal theory I have that I'd be curious to get your take on is that City Hall downtown is just such a much more pleasant place to report from than the county government headquarters in Clayton, which if you haven't been is this almost like Soviet style building where you go through the security and you have to go into a basement to get to where the county council meets. So I can't help but wonder if you were having to play the game kind of on expert mode, just because if you're a reporter, you can just kind of walk around City Hall, bump into people and get scoops in a way you certainly can if you're covering the county government.
Yeah, I mean, City Hall is first of all such a beautiful building. Yeah. I think people see it from the outside and it looks like this terrifying Gothic structure that's never been cleaned. But inside it is this beautiful grand building, and you're exactly right. The way that it is laid out, it is so common for just the collector of revenue or this member of the Board of Aldermen to be walking around, and reporters are they're always hanging out at those tables on the second floor, and that's a really easy way to get a scoop. And so you do have to be on much higher alert, and something that would happen pretty frequently to me is I would get a phone call. Did you tell this reporter to come here to talk to us? I'm like, no, what are you talking about? There's a reporter standing outside of the Board of Public Service right now trying to get a quote from somebody. And it's all right, let me go talk to this person. But it's a much more accessible environment for the media, which is a good thing, right? We want our government to be open and accessible. But it did create additional challenges in that, you just had to constantly be ready for that potential to just have to respond.
We're talking to Connor Kerrigan, a writer on Substack and former communications director for Mayor Tishaura Jones. We'll return to that conversation in just a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor. Make a real impact in your community and boost your business by becoming a corporate partner of the St. Louis Art Museum. Through the Corporate Partner Program, you'll support free year-round programs and help bring over 125,000 people closer to the arts and to each other. Plus, your investment contributes to strengthening St. Louis as a regional center for economic growth and talent attraction. Learn more at slam.org. All right, we're back with Connor Kerrigan. And yeah, Connor, I really wanted to talk to you today about what you're doing on Substack. I think it's great.
Yeah.
You're doing smart analysis of the city and of state politics in a first-person, voice-filled kind of way. I'm just wondering, when you sort of consider yourself, I kind of think of you as like a columnist, someone sort of like a Tony Messenger, someone like that.
Yeah.
Very fact-based, but still very much giving your opinion. But how do you sort of consider what you're doing on Substack?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think columnist is the kindest way you could put it. There's a lot going on in the city, and one thing that I think I noticed, especially after the Riverfront Times kind of went away, is a lack of that more left-leaning voice in the city. A lot of the columnists that you see writing about St. Louis have more conservative values. Maybe they're, again, more geared towards a county audience or something like that. And so I've been trying to write about what's happening in the city in a way that is digestible, easy to understand, and also has the perspective of that more progressive, left-leaning voice that I used to write with before I was in Room 200.
Nice. And have you found, I feel like it must be a little bit of a gift and the curse, your former job, and that you do have a really good sense of how City Hall operates. But at the same time, folks are going to say, well, this is a Tashara guy. He's in the bag for his former boss. How do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, it's Reddit loves to tell me, if you're criticizing the current administration, your opinion doesn't matter because you were a part of the former administration. And I understand that perspective on things. I try to be as fair as possible. One thing that I've tried to do is, I do try to compliment the new administration when I feel they're doing something right, as much as I denigrate them when I think they're doing something wrong. And I also, I try not to, as much as I can, I try not to hold the Jones administration on this high pedestal to act like we were, the model of a perfect administration. And so I try to just be as honest and speak more from a resident perspective than from like a City Hall insider perspective.
Yeah. And one piece I wanted to ask you about in particular was a relatively recent one of yours about the ongoing effort by the Attorney General to remove Sheriff Alfred Montgomery. I really appreciate it. You had a very nuanced take. Can you kind of tell us how you feel about what seems to be the story that everyone's talking about in the city?
I think I can distill it down to a single sentence, which is Alfred Montgomery should not be the sheriff anymore, but Andrew Bailey shouldn't be the one to remove him. Yeah. Alfred Montgomery should resign from his office out of respect for the city, out of respect for himself. He very clearly is ill-equipped to do the job. But however, I don't believe that we need Andrew Bailey coming in and doing what he did with Kim Gardner, where he when Kim Gardner was resigning, the writing was written on the wall that she was on her way out. And that's when Andrew Bailey came in and said, oh, I'm going to, file this horror on tow and get her to resign. And he's doing the exact same playbook with Alfred Montgomery. While I do believe Alfred Montgomery should not be the sheriff of the city of St. Louis, there were plenty of instances when I was still in the mayor's office where he did things that I believe warrant his resignation. But I don't believe that it is Andrew Bailey's job to come into the city and remove this individual.
I see exactly what you're saying there. Just one more question about several pieces where you've touched on the current administration, Kara Spencer.
Yeah.
What are some things that you think that she, is doing well, and where would you like to things done differently?
Yeah. There's a couple moves that they've made that I do think are good. One, the hiring of, I can't remember his name, but the new individual that's going to be the head of operations.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Former military. I can't remember his name. I'm a little embarrassed not to remember it. But that getting someone with that type of operational mindset into that role, I think is going to pay a lot of dividends for this administration. I think that was a really smart hire. And focusing on making sure the operations of the city go smoothly. I think that is really, really smart, and I believe it'll pay off not only for the citizens of St. Louis, but also for the administration going forward. A couple things that I'm not super happy about. So, we are at a point now where there is not a ton of Black leadership left in the city of St. Louis, in a city that is, roughly 50% Black population. And I think that this administration has been taking away some programs and shifting their focus away from the north side of the city. Obviously, with the tornado relief, they're trying to be as responsive to that. I think there's certainly room for judgment there. The most insightful thing that I think Tashara Jones noted about the city was that the city of St. Louis cannot succeed if over half is left to fail. And what she was talking about was the Del Mar divide. The biggest topic that comes up now in the city of St. Louis used to be crime, right? No matter what I did when I was in room 200, what are you doing about crime? What are you doing about crime? Now the conversation has shifted to population loss, which is extremely important. You need to grow as a city. 90% of the population loss that the city experienced from 2000 to 2020, 90% were Black households. 90% of those Black households were female-led households or single mothers, right? That if you are going to have a conversation about population loss in the city of St. Louis, you need to be talking about what this city is doing to retain Black households and Black households led by single mothers. What do single mothers want? The same thing that every parent wants. They want good schools and safe neighborhoods. The mayoral administration, unfortunately, can't do much about the schools, and golly, did we try. But that's, it's a fully separately elected board. That's a very difficult topic to broach. Safe neighborhoods is something that is achievable by a municipality. The issue is, and I think this is where maybe some of my criticism is for the Spencer admin. A lot more of my criticism is for the state and their recent takeover of SLMPD. There seems to be a belief that you can create safe neighborhoods by just dumping a bunch of cops into them. And sure, the city of St. Louis needs more officers, but in reality, you can't police your way into safe neighborhoods. You have to develop safe neighborhoods. And that comes with long-term focused investment on those areas of the city that have been neglected for so long. And so that would be, if and Kara Spencer, who won by an overwhelming margin, certainly has no reason to listen to my advice. Yeah. But if I was to give it, it would be, you want to talk about population loss and how to bring this city back and see it grow again. You need to be focused on developing and investing in safe neighborhoods all over the city, especially north of Del Mar.
Nice. All right, I want to end on talking about something that we actually have in common here. Sure. So back in 2024, I was a reporter for the Riverfront Times when my wife and I had our son, Ari. Yeah. And then 3 months later, the paper basically went kaput.
Oh my gosh. I still remember, yeah.
Yeah. And the timing was not ideal, to say the least.
Right.
But you had a very similar experience earlier this year. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So April 8th was the election. My boss lost, therefore I was not asked to stay on with the new administration, so I lost my job. 3 days later, on April 11th, Theodore Kerrigan was born, my baby boy. So that was a very hectic time. I am very grateful to Kara Spencer. She kept me on through the duration of my paternity leave, which was a very kind gesture that I still am very appreciative of to this day. And so all of my criticism of her has that grain of salt of, I'm still very grateful. Thank you for giving my full 6 weeks of paternity leave to be with my son. But yeah, it's such a blur that time, because not only was I learning how to be a dad for the first time, but I was like, okay, how do I make money so I can put food on the table? Yeah. My wife is in medical residency right now. She's in her 4th year of medical residency. And so she only got 6 weeks of leave and then had to go back to these 14-hour days at the hospital. And so it just got into this very hectic time of taking care of a newborn, trying to find income, and also writing and, trying to stay relevant as a voice in the St. Louis media environment. So yeah, very, very hectic time.
Yeah, actually, I found it was maybe not the worst time for me to lose my job, just because I was not as worried about it as I might have otherwise been, because I had other things to worry about.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think about, the tornado came a month after my son was born, and if the Jones administration had stayed on, I would have had a longer paternity leave. But I realized, like, oh no, I would have been back to work that day on May 16th, because this was a cataclysmic event that needed a comms response. And so there is a bit of that relief. And, it's not my job to go react to this. It's my job to hang out at home with my son and work on building up my business. It's not my job to go be gone for, like 16 hours a day responding to this disaster. And so there is a bit of relief. And, I went from this job that was 24/7. I mean, we're talking 2:30 a.m. I'd get a call from Mitch McCoy over at SLMPD because there had been an officer-involved shooting, or there had been, some type of thing that people were going to ask about the next morning that I needed to know about. Very much a 24/7, always on, work phone, always active type of job, to kind of hanging out and learning how to, just hang out at home and not be adrenaline fueled 24/7. And I got to say, and you probably can agree, waking up at 2:30 a.m. to change a diaper is way better than waking up at 2:30 a.m. because there's been some emergency that I need to respond to.
Guys, I think that is, I have not ever awoken at 2:30 for a police call, but I do think that that tracks with my experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, hey, congrats again on
you.
Theo, to you and your wife, and thank you so much for coming by the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And before we go, where can folks find you and your stuff?
Yeah, so if you're interested in kind of the analysis that I have of the city of St. Louis and the state of Missouri, I'm on Substack. It's called Show Me Last Week, because I used to do an analysis of the last week, and now it's a little more current. Show Me Last Week. You can find Show Me Last Week on Substack, on TikTok, on Instagram. And then I've also got a little digital marketing agency. So I took all the skill that I gained in Room 200. One of the things that we're very proud of is that our social presence in that office accelerated under my tenure. We got much better at social media engagement. And so that's something that I've transferred now to, I'm working with some private clients. So if anyone listening to this is interested in that type of work in social media or digital marketing, the organization is called KCO, just Kerrigan Co. You can find it on LinkedIn, or you can just email me, Connor@ConnorKerrigan.com.
All right, fantastic. Well, hey, Connor, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
In just a second, I'll be talking to St. Louis Magazine's business editor, Eric Schmid, about St. Charles residents who are up in arms over a proposed data center. But first, a word from our sponsor. This episode of the 314 podcast is supported by the Regional Arts Commission of St. Louis. For the last 40 years, the Regional Arts Commission of St. Louis has funded the arts and culture experiences you know and love, and they're ready to celebrate. Join RAC on August 28th at the iconic Union Station downtown for a party like no other. They will have it all: incredible performances, surprise guests, live art experiences, and much more. Tickets are limited. Get yours at racstl.org. And now, the closer. An entity trying to build a massive data center in St. Charles has been quietly working its way towards getting the necessary approvals to start construction. But at a recent planning and zoning meeting in St. Charles, when residents finally had a chance to weigh in, things were anything but quiet. Eric was there to witness it all, and he's here to tell us about it. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here too. I guess just to start, the term data center gets tossed around quite a bit. And frankly, I'm not sure if I was put on the spot if I could say exactly what a data center is. So what is it that these folks are trying to build out in St. Charles?
Yeah, they're trying to build, essentially on a plot of land, 5 separate large warehouse-looking buildings that have rows and rows and rows of server racks, just a whole bunch of computers in them that are connected to the internet, that store data, that process data. These are things that companies want to build right now to support artificial intelligence, cloud computing, basically the stuff that makes the internet work so that when you open up your phone or open up your computer, you can access data and not have it be on your device.
So this is a real growth industry, these data centers.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of that is driven because of the adoption and use of artificial intelligence across so many different industries. It's not just like people experimenting with things like ChatGPT, but you have a lot of companies that are tailor-making their own AI tools or augmenting things like ChatGPT or Claude into their actual workflows. And so this is something that is just really expanding. And you have companies like Meta and Google and Amazon and a lot of other ones saying, we need more of these data centers.
Nice, nice. I see how this is totally something that's getting popular everywhere, not just here in the metro region. But what is it about this project, this proposed project in particular, which was kind of quietly working its way along? What is it about it that suddenly has St. Charles residents so upset?
A big portion of that is the development would be in a place that floods right now. It is in the floodplain, and the majority of the comments at the public meeting were people saying, okay, you're gonna, put 15 feet of fill in and then build, which fill is like they're just putting a whole bunch of dirt on the ground so that the elevation raises. And then on top of that, you would build all of these warehouses and the adjoining facilities and services that would help it run. And residents were saying, okay, you're going to raise up the land here when it rains. And if there's a lot of water moving through this part of the region, that water has to go somewhere. It's just not like it's just going to disappear. And so residents were concerned that, ones that either had property around where this would be built, they're saying this water is going to probably flood my land, or it's going to make my life a lot more challenging to live. And there was even one person who said, I know that people drive along Missouri 370, which is the highway that would be right next to where this proposed development is. And he said, even when there's like a 2-inch rain, which happens not infrequently here, the fields that this data center would be built on flood. They have water in it. And so it's kind of this issue of, people were really concerned about, how where is stormwater going to go? How are they going to manage this and make sure that it doesn't adversely affect other properties around that would be lower down after this would be built?
And if I remember from your reporting, was it specifically they were worried about diesel fuel getting into the groundwater? And when I think of data centers and diesel, I don't necessarily associate those two. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so that was another issue that was raised up. This site would store, something like 1 million gallons of diesel fuel in a whole bunch, like I think 150 different tanks is what the proposal had put on there. And the diesel fuel would be used to power backup generators if the power if there was ever a power interruption. So the data center there's a proposal to have an Ameren substation there so that it would link into the existing grid so that, the power that Ameren generates would help run this data center. But if there was ever an interruption there, then there's backup generators that would go on so that there isn't an interruption with how the data center functions. And one of the public comments was specifically concerned about the storage of this diesel fuel because the site is also in what's known as the Wellhead Protection District, which is a part of St. Charles that's where the groundwater, or the water that goes falls onto the ground and then percolates down into the aquifer below. That is where St. Charles gets its drinking water from. And so the public comment was concerned of if there is an incident where diesel fuel, a petroleum product, gets into that groundwater, then it would contaminate the drinking water source of the city. And that did not sit right with this person. And he even said, I'm not vehemently against data centers in general. I just think if you want to put it where you're proposing to put it, that's just not a good idea. I don't think that you should do it. And he also followed up and said, if you move forward and put this in place, you're going to break the trust of us as residents, which I thought was a really interesting thing to raise.
Yeah. And speaking of that trust, there was 2 things I thought it was very interesting, very notable that officials were being a bit coy about both who is the quote unquote entity behind this data center, who's trying to build it, and also who some of the tenants might be, who would actually be renting out the sort of the chips and the storage space at that data center. Can you talk about those sort of 2 somewhat unknowns?
Yeah, so I asked St. Charles City Mayor Dan Borgmeyer after the meeting, who's the entity that wants to rent this, or who's the tenant, who would be the tenant, and who's the developer. And he said, well, I can't really tell you. And I said, well, why can't you tell me? And he said, well, the developer doesn't want this to be out there. What's interesting is the applicant so if you look at the public meeting notice, the packet that is presented to the commission board, that they would review, that's public information. The applicant on there is an entity called CRG Cumulus LLC, which has the same listed address as the construction firm Clayco out in St. Louis County. And so it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, the officials aren't saying one thing or the other, but we can, connect the dots and say, if there's an entity that has the same listed address as a well-known company, it's more than likely that those two things are linked and related, but there's nothing officially said, yes, Clayco is the one that wants to build this thing. However, Clayco as a company has been vocal or has indicated earlier at the end of last year and earlier this year that data centers are a growth opportunity for the construction business, that they want to be constructing more. And so I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple weeks or months, it's like, oh yes, this is a part of their arm, but it's nothing like officially out there or confirmed by the city that this is who wants to move forward and build it.
Yeah. And you mentioned the mayor of St. Charles there. You talked to him at this meeting, and he told you, if I remember correctly, he said basically his rebuttal to some of the upset citizens was essentially that this is not the proper forum for many of your specific complaints, which struck me as a guy who's, got to win election, maybe some might say a little bit tone deaf.
Yeah, and residents really clocked that at the meeting. Many of the times that the mayor was making these arguments during the public, not the public, but during the committee discussion moments, people were grumbling about it. People were like just not buying up what he was putting down. The commission gave an unfavorable recommendation on whether or not to do this conditional use permit. So it goes back to the city council, and the city council will actually vote on whether or not they will move forward on this. But when the commission gave this unfavorable recommendation, everybody stood up and applauded and then just walked out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what do you think the status of the project is now? It sounds like it's the public has made their voices known, and I suspect they will continue to do so. But at the same time, like you said, it's up to the city council.
Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see what the city council does, and I'm curious. I would like to go to that city council meeting and see if there's as many people who show up to it as did to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, because that could be a real telltale sign of whether or not like people just wanted to be heard once, or if they're really going to push hard on their stances of, we don't want this. And if they're going to stay committed and dedicated to showing up to that, like that's something where, the people who are on the city council, who are on the Planning and Zoning Commission, like they have to show up to these meetings every single time that they're happening. But as a resident of St. Charles, like sometimes you might be busy. You don't have to make that effort. Like it's a little bit of a higher, not barrier to entry, but you have to stay on top of it as a public citizen. So I'm curious to see if that pressure stays up, and I'll certainly be going to those meetings to see if it happens, if it does.
Nice. Okay, last question. The hot film that just came out last week starring Pedro Pascal, Eddington, is in part about a small town very upset about a data center being built on the edge of their city. I'm curious, does your reporting in St. Charles make you more or less interested in seeing this new film?
I'll give it a shot. Probably. I don't know if it's one of those things now. Like, I don't know if I would go and see it in theaters, but once it hits the streaming, yeah, I'll give it a shot. Maybe I'll look at it after I'm no longer super in the reporting, but maybe it would be fun to see like if the issues that they bring up in the movie match what people are saying in real life, or if the drama and the horror of it is a little bit played up because it's Hollywood. I'd be interested to see that.
All right, very cool. Hey, Eric, thank you so much for talking with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, Ryan.
And thanks to Sarah Finsky, the usual host of this podcast, for letting me take the reins this week and have a couple of really interesting conversations. I'm Ryan Kroll, and that's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me and Sarah every day in your inbox thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting. Sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine. I'm Ryan Kroll, and this is the 314. See you next time.